the Work Wonders podcast, brought to you by Asta HR, where we simplify the human side of business. I'm Angela.
And I'm Susan. Let's dive into today's episode and find out what you've been wondering about. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the probation period, why you should use one, and how to get the best use out of that time. So let's get started. This is the Work Wonders podcast.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Angela.
So probation we're talking about today. So that's the initial start of a person's job.
Exactly.
Initial start, that's the same word, isn't it? That initial period. Interestingly, it doesn't sit anywhere in legislation. So if you look at the Fair Work Act or you even look at your award, it won't talk about a probation period as we would probably all be very familiar with that term. There's probably a lot of people out there that just assume that isn't that just how it is, the first 3 months or the first 6 months?
Yeah, has to be that.
Not to confuse anyone, but there is a piece of legislation where it's called the qualifying period or the minimum employment period. So if a person was dismissed and they felt like they had the right to go for an unfair dismissal claim, they need to have passed the minimum employment or qualifying period in order to do that.
Yeah, and as you said, we don't want to confuse the issue.
Yeah, not to confuse that. It's purely just around unfair dismissal, but It does come into play as we talk a little more.
So the probation period, how long?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. It can be up to the employer what that length is.
So they could actually decide not to have any at all?
Yeah, you could. You could. Controversial, isn't it?
We're not going to recommend that.
No.
Yeah, so some of us who've been around a bit longer probably had in mind that there's a specific period that it needs to be 3 months, 6 months. And they're the two periods that we would probably recommend, right?
Yeah, I'd agree.
Probably ideally 6 months because from what I've observed, people tend to let that time drag on.
Yeah,
or not drag on, but, that's part of what we're going to be talking about today is how do you manage that period to get the best out of it. So let's talk about why you would have a probationary period.
Well, it's not a compliance issue, is it? If it's not in legislation, it's not demanded of you to have it. As we said, you can opt not to. So it comes down to really asking yourself what you would do with that time, and it comes down to it being a really internal process, something that you want to do.
And something that you want to have a plan for.
So in, let's call it probation, that initial period, whether it's 3 or 6 months, an employee is still entitled to all the things under the National Employment Standards.
Okay, so leave, pay, obviously.
Yes.
A notice period.
Yep, notice period, definitely, all of that.
So if they're entitled to all those things, why
bother?
Yeah, I think there's one main reason.
Yeah, you're right. When it comes to an employee, if you've got someone who's not doing a great job and you need to talk to them about that, you're not happy with how they're performing in the role, you don't have to follow what we would know as a pretty fair and normal performance management process if they're in that probation period. So specifically what we mean there is you don't have to sort of wait out the time to give them a chance to improve and consult with them regularly on that and so on. It's as simple as it's not working. Thank you very much, but you haven't passed your probation and you can terminate employment.
Yeah. And so you can do that anytime within the period.
And you would just note back to that qualifying period if you're a small business, if they haven't exceeded 12 months, then they can't go for unfair dismissal. Similarly, for a larger business, if they haven't exceeded 6 months, they can't go for unfair dismissal.
I guess one way of looking, this might be a bit off track, but I do that. One way of looking at the probation is actually an extension of your recruitment and onboarding process.
Yeah, I love that.
So it's a time where we're in a bit of a grey zone where you're confirming your recruitment decision. You selected this person for the role, but let's see how they perform.
As you said at the beginning, if you're going to choose this process, you're going to design how long it's going to be. You want it to have a point. Otherwise, there's no point worrying about it, is there?
No. And if you're not going to plan for it and have regular check-ins, and that starts with the person knowing exactly what their deliverables are. What are the outcomes you're expecting from them?
Yes, and that starts at recruitment, doesn't it?
It does. But sometimes things change during that phase. You might find someone who's got specialist skills that you end up recruiting, which you weren't actually looking for in the first place. So there's certain things that you'll need to, from day one, specify to them, this is what you're responsible for, this is what the outcomes are, and this is our expectations, not just on performance but also workplace behaviour and conduct.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. It's also, you're talking there about expectations, but also I'm thinking about their induction. Their welcome to the organisation as well. You want to make sure that they feel part of the team, that they've got what they need and they're well equipped to do their job. You don't want a situation where someone feels like they haven't got the piece of information they need to complete that task or they don't know who to reach out. Yeah. So being analytical about that to make sure you're giving them what they need to set them up for success.
Just like with any regular performance appraisal, your meetings with the new employee during the probation process gives you an opportunity to find out from them how they're going as well. So you can pick up any signs that they're maybe not going to stick around, but also find out, if there's training they've missed out on or they don't have access to files that they need, all those sorts of things. So it's a two-way process.
I'd agree with you. There was a stat that we saw, Susan, which was a bit of a scary one. 6 out of 10 managers in Australia had the experience of an employee leaving in probation.
Okay.
So in that first 3 or 6 months.
Okay.
So it's quite frequent.
And you'd prefer that not to be a surprise?
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd prefer it not to happen, ideally.
Well, exactly. So the point is that we're giving you will hopefully help prevent that from happening to you.
Are you looking to hire staff for your business but fitting it in around your other work is tough? Have you struggled to find the right people before but it ends up feeling like more work than it's worth? Well, our team at Asta HR can help you. From advertisement to offer, we can guide you through the entire process just as if we were your HR manager. And you benefit from our decades of experience to find not just anyone to fill your vacancy but someone that you'll love to work with. You can choose a package that suits you and you pay a fixed fee. Let us take care of the time-consuming stuff and we'll fast-track you straight to only the strongest candidates so you can spend your time growing your business. Schedule a free call with either Susan or I right now at astahr.com.au. Now, it's back to the episode.
So, Angela, from what we've been talking about, you've got the probation period lined up, you're making a bit of a plan, but you really need to be deciding during that time, don't you? You need to engage your analytical mind as well as all the routine sort of stuff.
Yeah, you talked about an extension of the recruitment process that you want to verify what you've decided in recruitment. Absolutely. Making a decision whether a person's the right person for a job over just an interview and reading their resume is really, really difficult.
It is fraught.
you learn a lot more when they're actually in the job.
That's right.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners have experienced that where you go, oh, okay, I didn't know you'd do that after they've started. So use that time, use those first few months to be aware, be conscious and be proactive and make a decision that they are the right person or they're not to make the right decision for your business.
And so what that looks like is really meeting with them on a regular basis, making sure that you are doing that before you get to the end of probation.
Yes. So this is where you'd keep that qualifying period in mind. If you are a small business, you've got that 12-month window, so it's not such a rush for you if you're playing with a 6-month probation. But if you're a larger business, you've only got that 6 months really. So if you decide to make a 6-month probation period, you don't want to leave it until 5 months and 29 days before you do something about it.
Or even worse, 6 months and 1 day.
Yes.
So be ready to make a decision. You've agreed with them up front what's expected. We talked about the performance, the workplace behaviour, all those expectations.
And go back to your job description if you're unsure of what you're looking for, what outcomes are you asking for, how are you going to measure whether they're doing the right job or not.
Yeah. So you don't need to wait out the period before you decide.
No.
So if it's clearly not working out, you don't have to wait till the end of probation.
No.
You can I don't like to say get rid of them. Give them
Make a
opportunities to succeed elsewhere before we get to the end. But you also, ideally, would want to give them a chance to improve. Yeah, it may be that they're not performing because they didn't know they were supposed to do something, or they haven't been able to find that file.
And if you're speaking with them regularly, those conversations should naturally happen.
So no surprises is always my rule.
Yeah. But if you are going to proceed to terminating them, what would be the right way to do it?
Well, you're going to need to give them a notice period because remember we talked about the National Employment Standards. So I think in most cases, if it's under a year, it'd be 1 week notice. Likewise for them, if they decide on their side that they want to leave, still need to give 1 week's notice.
So ideally, we'd be having a meeting with them to say, look, unfortunately, it's not working out. I don't feel this is the right fit for both of us. So you won't be successfully passing your probation, something along those lines.
I agree, but I'm afraid we're taking a bit of a negative stance on this because, of course, there's always going to be people who will successfully complete probation and will be, the glowing employee the golden child that you hope for.
Well, whichever way it goes, you'd want to end that probation period with a letter, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need to be informed.
So either a letter that says, congratulations,
welcome on board, yes.
Or
please stick around, or one that says the opposite, I guess. I think the point that I would like to get across, though, is that it's up to you to make that decision and don't let it just roll on into, as we've said, after the probation period, because then you're in a whole could be in a whole other ballgame. And your whole point of having a probation was to allow you to operate differently during that period.
Yes.
And as we said, manage the new employee more closely so they know what's going on and you know what's going on.
I think both you and I have seen it happen before where employers do that. They just think, well, it might get better. I'll just see what will happen in another month's time or they don't do anything.
Yes.
And then in another year or 2 years, it's that bad that they're coming to us saying, I need help.
That's right.
Because I've now got this problem that I don't know how to fix.
So you need to be paying more attention during those first critical weeks.
Make it work for you.
Is there anything else?
Well, after the probation, then they would then fall into your, let's call it a regular appraisal process. So you'd not want to forget about them after that period and don't review them again. You'd then want to continue it.
I'm just laughing because I'm thinking, they've been here 6 months. They know everything. They'll be fine. I can just rely on them to do the job forevermore.
No, we'd encourage you to do a regular review of all your stuff. Yeah. All right, so bottom line, if I'm an employer and I decide to use a probation period, I've got some decisions to make, don't I?
Yeah, you've got to be intentional about it, got to plan for it, know what you're measuring people against.
Yep. Choose an appropriate length.
Yes.
How am I going to review it? Plan for when that will be, how frequent, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, diarise those meetings, make sure that the employee knows when you're going to have the meetings, what's going to be discussed.
Yeah, it's important for them to know they're going to be reviewed.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and be part of that. You want them to be part of that discussion. A big thing is don't forget to put it in your employment contract.
Oh, yes.
As we said at the beginning, it's not in legislation, so you can't refer back to, it's in your award, it's in this, it's in that. You need to have it in your employment contract with your employee, each individual employee, so that they know they are formally part of a probation period and you can rely back on that if you do need to take action in that time.
Yeah, definitely.
So we hope you found today's episode helpful, where we talked all about probation, what it is and why you should use it, and how to get the best out of that time. Is there something that you might take away from today's episode to use in your business? Are you using a probation period, or perhaps it's something you want to modify or change the way that you're doing it? Let us know. You can reach out to us on our LinkedIn page, Work Wonders Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Work Wonders podcast, brought to you by Asta HR. Hit the subscribe button now to never miss an episode. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, you can find us over at astahr.com.au. See you in the next episode.